Hello and welcome to Miscellaneous Musings, my informal, mostly unedited pseudo-podcast where I ramble about narrative mediums for as long as I like, sometimes with guests, and always released a week early for my Patreon supporters. For the 5th edition of Miss Muse, I think I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk a little bit about Steins Gate, Operation Yggdrasil, subs versus dubs, and the whole thing surrounding why the first video in the series came out the way it did, and why did I just re-upload it in this format? Why did I make changes? And I want to talk about all of this. So I think the first thing that we need to say to make this story make sense is that when I first watched Steins Gate for the first time, back when I was first really getting into anime, I watched Steins Gate dubbed. Because back then I was still in the mood of, I will watch the first episode dubbed. If I don't think the dub is good, I will rewatch the first episode subbed and then just move on from there. And so what I did was, for Steins Gate particularly, I remember watching the dub being like, wow, this dub is great. Rewatching the first episode in sub to see if the sub was better, finding that I preferred the dub version, and then just watched the rest of it dubbed. And so this was like, 3-4 years ago now? 5. Wow, it might be 5 years ago now. I think I watched Steins Gate for the first time in 2014. That is a long, wow, damn. It's still so good. Steins Gate is so good. Anyway, so I watched it first dubbed, and I really liked the dub version. And so I was obviously primed by that decision. By the decision to watch the dub, was primed to think of Steins Gate in dubbed format. That actually wound up not being the case for Zero. I watched Zero subbed, and then tried to watch a few episodes dubbed and was like, wow, this is so much worse. So then I watched the rest of Zero subbed, and I much preferred the sub for Zero. I've never played the VN. I've never played any of the VNs. I'm thinking about buying Elite, because I think that would be fun for me. The only VN I've ever played is Doki Doki Literature Club. It's literally the only one. So I went through this priming of the Steins Gate dub as, in my opinion, better. At least for me. It was better for me. And I totally see I'm about to get to this in a second. And so when I decided I was going to do the Steins Gate analysis series, I was like, I want to do the dub because it's the one that I'm the most familiar with. And I think it's really good. And how many people could really complain about the dub when I think it's so good? It turns out a lot of people can complain. And so just a lot of comments were like, ew, dub, like just rude stuff. And just so everyone is clear, I have a healthy amount of pride. I have a healthy amount of pettiness to me. And so whenever I read a rude comment, I thought to myself, well, fuck you. I'm not going to, excuse my language, but seriously, like, I'm not going to make a change because you saying this doesn't change my mind, and I'm going to keep doing this to spite you. So for those of you who wrote really well thought out comments saying, well, the Japanese version has like these changes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you know who you are because you actually spent the time to write a well thought out comment. You're the reason why I decided at the end of the day to make this change and to use both the Japanese and the English versions in Operation Yggdrasil. And a good part of that is because I am someone who, when I decide that I want to do something, I want to do it comprehensively. I want to do it completely. I want ideally for me to do the thing and then never be like, oh, I missed this thing, or oh, I missed this thing. And that is a unrealistic goal, right? Hyoka has its flaws. If I could go back and redo it, there are things that I would redo, but it's not so flawed that I am like, oh, it's so bad, I need to redo the whole thing. Like, there are parts that need to be redone. I will fix episode 6 eventually. I will make a video on a few of the things that I want to talk about. They probably actually won't be in rose colored, but they'll be separate videos. Not really the time or place for this. But that is how I want to do things. And so I totally understand why me using English dub, which is not the definitive version. To be clear, like, just because I prefer it does not mean that I think it's the definitive version. The Japanese version is the definitive version. It is the closest to the intended vision of the creators. And because of that, I very much want to do both. And I think that the English version has interesting takes, is interestingly illuminating, is a good example of the kind of things that happen when we're localizing a project. I think it has all these things that that are added benefits, and I'm really hoping that this series can explore that and maybe, just maybe, convince people who would otherwise just be like, oh yeah, Japanese is better all the time, all the time, to say, oh, maybe there are instances where the English can be just as good and in some ways superior. I'm not, yeah. So that is kind of my point regarding that. Because I want to be complete and comprehensive, that is the reason why I've decided to do this. And it was a tough decision to take down the video initially, to take down the first video, because if you looked at, so here, I'll actually just pull up the statistic. So at the time of me recording this and taking down the video, it was at 32,000 views, which I think makes it like the 8th or 9th most viewed video on my channel, with like hundreds of comments, thousands of likes. Like, the video was doing extremely well and was getting hundreds of clicks every hour, even a week after it got published, which is normal, to be fair. So I cryptically tweeted the other day, and I can pull that one up too. I tweeted this out. Sometimes you have to let go of what is convenient or personally gratifying to do what is right. That can be a tough decision, but at the end of the day, if you remove yourself and your desires from the equation, it becomes clear what needs to be done. New videos soon. And so what I was talking about there is that, like, I think this is very human. I doubt I'm the only person who feels this way, but there is something about, like, these numerical numbers, the fact that this was my 8th most viewed video, the fact that it had so many, like, mostly positive comments, the fact that it had so many likes, it's hard not to feel like, oh, I'm gonna leave this video up because it's bringing in so much attention to the channel. I'm gonna leave this video up and I'll do an addendum for the Japanese version in the next video. And basically what wound up happening was, I thought to myself, well, okay, if I wasn't the creator of replay, like, if I wasn't replay value, if I hadn't made this video, if this wasn't going to be the first introduction that so many people had to this playlist, would I say, oh yeah, an addendum is fine? And the answer to that is, it's not really fine. It would have been okay, but it's not the ideal, nor is it, like, the best way to handle it. And so it was pretty clear at that point, once I'd, like, kind of taken away my own desires, that I was just going to remove the video entirely, the older version of the video entirely. It's still unlisted at this point. I'll probably leave it unlisted for, like, another 2 weeks, so that people who liked the video and are going to use that to try and get back to the channel to find the next video will be able to do that. So I'm hoping to have episodes 1 and 2 done before I take it down finally. But yeah, that's kind of what happened with that. Trying to think if there's anything else regarding Steins Gate. I talked about the sub versus dub problem. I talked about the video specifically. I gave credit to the people who left thoughtful comments. Yeah, I think that's kind of everything. I'm sorry for the shorter Mismuse than usual. Especially because it was so much about me and not about narrative mediums. I guess the best way that we could try and tie this into, like, a larger point is that analyzing content, I guess, analysis is a medium in and of itself, and so analysts need to be thoughtful about how we're analyzing the content and making sure that it is being done in the best, most interesting way possible. For me, that means putting the thing I'm talking about front and center. You'll see that I do a lot of quotes whenever I can. I try and use the soundtrack from either the scene or the show. For me, that stuff is really important. I like promoting the work itself above, my take is kind of irrelevant, right? I mean, it's interesting, and this is how I see things. But at the end of the day, I want to highlight why I think the thing is great, not why my interpretation of the thing is great, because my interpretation is probably irrelevant unless someone is going into the thing and being like, oh, this thing isn't that great. And then my interpretation might help them realize why that thing is great, or why people think that thing is great, or maybe even get them, ideally get someone thinking about that scene, that show, that moment, that analytical lens, and applying it to other things, going another step further. I love comments that not increase, but continue to build on what I talked about in that moment, or even just disagree with me, like disagree with the lens. I try and heart comments that I think do an interesting job of either disagreeing with the premise that I've set out, or my conclusion, or coming to a different conclusion, or comments that, go a step further and are like, wait, we can take this even further. Like, let's see how much further we can go. I try to heart comments like that because I think that is kind of the ideal that I'm striving for in what I'm doing. I love seeing comments like that. I love inspiring people to think about narrative in those ways. And in so that regard, that's kind of my hope for Steins Gate as a whole. I'm really hoping that I can get people thinking, I'm not planning on talking about the VN at all. Like, outside of the opening quote, I'm really not planning on talking about the VN because, as I've said, I haven't played it. And I am not about to sit down as someone who hasn't played the VN and be like, this is how Steins Gate fares as an adaptation, because I think that's a horrible idea for me. Because I also don't have a basis for understanding visual novels, because as I said, I only played the one. So I think I am the worst possible person who could possibly try to analyze Steins Gate as an adaptation. But I do feel confident in my ability to analyze Steins Gate, the anime, in both Japanese and English. So I'm hoping that someone will, step in and talk about, hopefully be able to take parts of what I've talked about and be like, well, the VN, let's analyze what this moment in the VN does, blah, 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 blah. I'm hoping that kind of happens, and I would love to see that. Oh, man. That is that. So now I guess I'll do a usual question, now that I've tied everything back together. So I embarrassingly recorded basically this entire thing and then realized I didn't have a question. So I asked on the Discord server, does anyone have a question for me? And Mac asks, what are my top 5 romance/dramas and why? I'm going to modify the question because I don't want to do a top 5. That would be entirely against the point of this. So I'm just going to, one of my favorite romance manga is this story called Taisho Maiden Fairy Tale. And now I'm going to butcher the Japanese. Taisho Otome Otogibanashi. I'm so sorry for that. It's really good. It's just really good. I love historical things for sure. I think the characters are so interesting. It's just really good. I highly recommend giving it a read. There are like maybe 4 manga, maybe 5 that if I ever made a video, like if I decided that I was okay making videos on manga, and I actually am working on one right now. That's a spoiler. There are like maybe 4 or 5 manga that I'm like, wow, these are so good that I'm going to break from my convention and do a story on a manga. And this is one of them. This is definitely one of them. Kaguya is another. Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. Those are probably the 3 that I'm most comfortable naming at this point in time. They're all really, really good. Noragami. There are actually more the more I think about it, but that's not really the point. Anyway, that is all I've got for that. Toradora is really good, by the way. That's another one that's up there. 5 sure. And that is that. Thank you so much for tuning into this edition of Miscellaneous Musings. Hopefully I cleared up some stuff and made the peek behind the curtain interesting. Specifically, what goes into my formatting, when am I likely to take something down, my desire to be a good content creator over I don't know, just like chasing views. I mean, as much as one says numbers don't matter, they matter. It's just a matter of I'm saying matter too much. It's just a matter of making sure that you pride the value of your work over what the numbers say they are. So that's kind of, if there was a moral to this video, that would be it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next time we'll have a guest on. I already know who it is. Hopefully after that we can branch out some, which should actually give you a hint of who it's going to be. And that is all. Thank you so much for my patrons who make Miss Muse possible. And they get it a week early. And until next time, thank you for watching, or in this case, listening.